Imagine this. You walk past your neighbor's house. You see her at the window. She waves at you. Everything seems normal. But what if I told you the woman you saw wasn't actually her, that the real owner of that house had already been murdered, and the person smiling at you was the killer pretending to be her? Imagine killing someone, cutting their body into pieces, getting rid of the evidence, and then living in their house, wearing their clothes, pretending to be them, for 2 whole weeks, without anyone realizing. This is not a movie. This is the story of Kate Webster, one of the most disturbing killers in Victorian England. The year is 1879, and the place is Richmond, a quiet, respectable part of London. Life here is calm, structured, predictable. But behind the doors of one house, something horrifying is about to unfold. Living there was a wealthy widow named Julia Martha Thomas. She was known to be strict, particular, and not easy to work for, which made it hard to keep servants. That's when she hired someone new, a young Irish woman named Kate Webster. Before we get into it, welcome to True Crime Journals. If you enjoy real, disturbing crime stories like this, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's get into the story. London is growing fast. Crowded streets, horse-drawn carriages, and a strict social hierarchy. In a quiet area called Richmond, things appear peaceful, respectable, orderly, safe. But behind closed doors, appearances can be deceiving. In one particular house lived a woman named Julia Martha Thomas. She was a widow, middle-aged, financially stable, the kind of woman who valued order, discipline, and control. But there was one problem. She couldn't keep servants. People would come, stay briefly, and leave. Some said she was difficult. Others said she was simply too strict. Either way, the house never stayed peaceful for long. And then she hired someone new. Her name was Kate Webster. At first glance, she seemed like any other domestic worker. Quiet, capable, willing to work. But beneath that surface was something very different. Kate wasn't new to trouble. She had a history of theft, dishonesty, manipulation. She had already spent time in prison. And yet, she managed to convince Julia Martha Thomas to hire her. Maybe she needed the help. Maybe she believed Kate had changed. Or maybe she had no idea who she was letting into her home. Because from the very beginning, things were off. The tension started small, instructions not followed, attitude problems, small disagreements. But over time, those small things turned into constant conflict. The house became tense. Arguments became louder, more frequent. Neither woman trusted the other. Mrs. Thomas was demanding, and Kate was defiant. The house became a place of constant tension. And in situations like this, it only takes one moment for everything to spiral out of control. That moment came, and then came the breaking point. On March 2nd, 1879, everything changed. That day started like any other, but something triggered an argument. We don't know exactly what was said, but we know how it ended. Kate Webster attacked her employer. In the struggle, Julia Martha Thomas was pushed down the stairs, and just like that, she was dead. Now think about that moment. Silence in the house. No witnesses. Just Kate, standing there, realizing what she had done. This is where most people panic. They run, they confess, they lose control. But not Kate. She stayed calm. What happened next shocked even seasoned investigators. Kate dismembered the body, boiled the remains, packaged parts for disposal. Some parts were thrown into the River Thames. Others were handled in ways so disturbing. They're still debated today. But that wasn't the most shocking part. The most shocking part is what she did next. Instead of reporting it, she decided to hide it completely. What followed was methodical, disturbingly calm. She dismembered the body, took her time, worked in that same house where the murder had just happened. She boiled parts, disposed of remains, and planned how to erase every trace. Some remains were thrown into the River Thames. Others were handled in ways that shocked investigators. And remember, all of this was happening in a quiet neighborhood where people walked by every day, completely unaware. But somehow, this still wasn't the most shocking part, because after everything she did, she made a decision that no one expected. She didn't leave. She stayed. And then, she became her. Kate Webster wore her victim's clothes, used her name, spoke to people as if nothing happened. Imagine that, talking to neighbors, knowing the real person is gone, and you're the reason why. For nearly 2 weeks, she lived as Julia Martha Thomas. And the scariest part, some people believed her. That's how convincing she was. She didn't hide. Instead, she transformed. She wore Mrs. Thomas clothes, used her identity, sold her belongings, and for nearly 2 weeks, she lived as Julia Martha Thomas, greeting neighbors, acting normal, pretending nothing had happened. And incredibly, some people believed her, but not everyone was fooled. Small details didn't add up. Behavior felt different. Something seemed off. Neighbors began to question things. And eventually, authorities were alerted. Once the investigation began, it didn't take long for everything to unravel. The lies, the disguise, the entire act started collapsing. Kate Webster tried to escape, but she was caught, arrested, brought back to face justice. The trial shocked the public, not just because of the murder, but because of the deception. The idea that someone could live as their victim so calmly was deeply disturbing. She was found guilty, and later that same year, she was executed. But the case didn't end there. It stayed in public memory because of how unusual it was. Not just violence, but identity, manipulation, and control. But even today, this case leaves disturbing questions behind. How did no one notice sooner? How could someone live as their victim so convincingly? And what does it say about human nature that someone could do all this and remain so calm? This wasn't just a murder. It was deception, identity, and something far darker. And it's a reminder, sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones closest to us. When the trial finally came to an end, and Kate Webster was found guilty, the story didn't just fade away. In many ways, for the people of Richmond, it was only the beginning of something else, grief. Because at the center of all the headlines, all the shocking details, and all the disturbing revelations, was a woman who had lost her life, Julia Martha Thomas. To the public, she had become part of a sensational case, a name printed in newspapers, a figure captured in illustrations. But to the people who actually knew her, she was much more than that. She was a neighbor, someone they had seen walking through the streets, someone they had spoken to in passing, someone who had lived among them quietly. And even though she was known to be strict, and sometimes difficult, no one believed she deserved an ending like this. The nature of the crime made it even harder to process. This wasn't just a sudden death. It was something far more disturbing. The idea that someone could be killed inside their own home, and then replaced, forced people to confront something deeply unsettling. For days, then weeks, the town was filled with conversations about what had happened. People replayed moments in their minds, wondering, did we see something we missed? Was there a moment we could have acted? Neighbors who had interacted with Kate Webster during those 2 weeks began to feel a chilling realization. They had spoken to her, believed her, trusted what they saw without knowing the truth. That realization stayed with many of them because it challenged something fundamental, the belief that you can recognize when something is wrong. In the aftermath of the trial, attention slowly began to shift away from the killer and back toward the victim. People began remembering Julia Martha Thomas not for how she died, but for how she lived. A woman who maintained her home, who lived independently in a time when that wasn't always easy, who, despite her strict nature, had built a life for herself in that quiet part of London. And as the shock began to settle, there was a growing feeling among locals that she deserved to be remembered properly, not just as part of a crime story, but as a person. In Victorian England, public mourning often took quiet forms. There were no large memorial events like we might see today. No viral tributes, no social media posts, but remembrance still happened, in conversations, in small gatherings, in the way people spoke her name, with a sense of sadness and disbelief. The house itself, once just another home on the street, became something else entirely. For those who lived nearby, it was no longer just a building. It was a place tied to something tragic, a reminder of what had happened behind closed doors. And even long after the case was over, that feeling didn't completely disappear. Over time, as the years passed, the story of the Richmond murder became part of local history, told and retold, not just because of how shocking it was, but because of what it revealed about people, about trust, about appearances, and about how easily those things can be manipulated. But within that story, there was always a quieter thread, the memory of Julia Martha Thomas, not as a headline, not as a victim in a sensational case, but as a real person, whose life ended in a way no one could have imagined. And while there may not have been a grand memorial, or a monument built in her name, her story endured, because people continued to talk about it, continued to remember, continued to ask how something like this could happen in a place that once felt so ordinary. And maybe that's the most lasting impact of all. Not just the shock of the crime, but the reminder it left behind, that even in the most familiar places, even among people we think we understand, There can be something hidden, something we don't see until it's too late. Cases like this make you think, not just about crime, but about people, because sometimes the most dangerous person isn't a stranger. It's someone inside the home, someone you trust, or someone you barely question. And that's what makes this story so unsettling. If you made it this far, let me know in the comments. Do you think she planned it, or did it just spiral out of control? And don't forget to subscribe for more real crime stories.